Hi again, everybody. After my last video, I got some more counsel. My volume's not very good, so I'm working on volume and pausing today. I don't have any really high-tech equipment, so I've used my little thing from my phone. I'll use the microphone on that and see if that improves the sound. This is the first part of my story, I guess. I was born a third-generation Jehovah's Witness. The story, as I was always told it, was that my grandfather actually set out to prove the JWs were wrong, but ended up deciding that they were right after all, and that this was the truth. So he apparently studied, he and his wife, my nana, studied with his, I don't know if it was his sister or what, but anyway, it was my mum's auntie when she was a baby. So they became really entrenched in the organisation. My dad grew up pioneering in Perth in Australia during his youth, and used to go door to door with the phonograph and crank it up when he'd find somebody who was prepared to listen to it at the doors. And he was then sent by the society to radio station 5KA in South Australia, and that's where he met my mum. My mum was actually on the radio station. She would sing, and my grandfather did one of the breakfast shows. I actually found some interesting old copies of Radio Call magazine that were on the net, which have a program from those times, a couple of them where my mum and my grandfather's name are mentioned. And they were at 5KA for quite some time. There was a lot of fuss, which ended up in the radio station being closed down for a time. But somewhere between that happening and, excuse me, 1946, when my older brother was born, they were sent by the society to where the need was great, which was Brisbane. And the society owned the home my grandparents lived in. It was a high-set house, and underneath, it wasn't closed in, it just had the wooden slats, but underneath there was what they called the depot, where my grandfather would handle all the literature for the various surrounding congregations. He would get bulk stock from the society, and he would then do up the orders, and someone from the congregation would come and pick it up. He also used to post stuff, but because I remember as a kid there was a set of scales on the counter there, but that could have been also because he was a Rawley dealer, so he would send stuff out for them as well. There was a little room under the house there that was his stock room for his Rawley products, and I do remember as a child when we would visit over there, I was quite fascinated to go into that little room and see all these lipsticks, especially bright red ones, face powder and creams and all sorts of whatnot, ointments that he sold. Anyway, as I said, he worked for them doing the depot for quite some time, until eventually the society decided to turn the home into two units, because as my grandfather was getting older, he needed some help in the depot, so this brother and his family moved into one flat, and my grandparents had the other one. And this went on for a while, until eventually they were building a new Kingdom Hall in a suburb of Brisbane, and transferred the depot to there. So my grandparents had no home after all those years working for the society, and my mum being the only child, they had to come and live with us. So we added a room onto our home, and they lived with us for about 10 years. My grandfather continued to run the depot for quite some time, till he was past it. But yeah, that went on for quite a while. As far as my childhood goes, I don't have a lot of memories, bits and pieces here and there, but I grew up with the usual JW stuff, going to the meetings all the time, witnessing, all that takes up a lot of your time. And in the days when I was a kid, we actually used to rent the hall that we had our meetings in. There weren't very many, if any, Kingdom Halls at that stage. And sometimes I would get an earlier bus because we didn't have a car in those days. We used to go by bus. So sometimes I'd get an earlier bus and go with my dad because he used to do the figures on the chart that used to stand at the front of the meeting, the entire meeting, I think, or maybe they brought it out for the service meeting, I'm not sure. But each month I would help him cut out the numbers. He had these big sheets of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, and red ones and black ones and whatever. And as a kid, I really enjoyed helping cut out the numbers and glue them onto the chart for him. They also used to call the roll in the ministry school back then. I remember a little exercise book that had everyone's name who was enrolled in the ministry school, and we would do the thing just like school, call out the name, brother such and such, present, and they'd get ticked off in this little book. There was lots of interesting things that went on back then. We had to get the key for the hall from the lady who lived in the house next door each time. A lot of my memories from that time, what stands out is kids being carted out of the hall because they were crying or something. And I particularly remember my little brother at one stage. His voice sort of trailing off, "I'll be good, Mummy, I'll be good," as he was headed towards the toilets for a spanking. From the earliest time I remember, we offered the Watch Taryn Awake door to door for 10 pence. It was decimal currency. Didn't come in till within my first year of being in the workforce, as I can remember. I remember we used to use just the King James Version or maybe American Standard Version of the Bible until the Society had completed the New World Translation. I think we had first the Christian Greek Scriptures. We had that in one volume, and then, or was it the other way around? Maybe we had the Hebrew in one, and then the other one. Anyway, it was released just in little small green-bound volume things, bit by bit, until the translation, so-called, was completed. For some time after first moving to Brisbane, my parents lived with my grandparents in this home owned by the Society, this house. My brother was born, and I believe we were there until a little while after I was born, and then we moved into our own home. My grandparents both claimed to be of the anointed, 144,000, and would take the emblems at the memorial, which fascinated quite a few people because they didn't see that happen that often. When I was a kid, it was only brothers who gave talks in the school. It was not till some time later I remember them announcing that women would be giving talks again, and there was mixed feelings about that. The Kingdom Ministry in those days was also called the Informant. Return visits were called back calls. A few things changed like that over the years. We had a little sheet of paper printed around the time the Bible was released, and there were several scriptures that it showed you in what it said in King James Version and what it said in this version, but this is what the New World Translation said, and it was so much easier to understand. One in particular was in Genesis, where it said about Jacob's sod pottage, and the New World's Translation said, rendered it, Jacob was boiling up some stew. So you see, this is a much more superior and understandable translation of the Bible that everybody should use. When we rented the hall, it was quite funny sometimes because there was a picture of the Queen on the wall, and it would get turned around to face the wall while the meeting was on. As I said, they were rented halls, and so we had to always set up the chairs beforehand and then put them all away again at the end and sweep the floor and take the key back to the lady next door. One poor little kid used to fall asleep in the meetings, and I always remember his dad would reach over and flick his ear to wake him up, stop him going to sleep. Oh, it was bad. My dad played the piano for the Kingdom songs most of the time, or sometimes my mum would play, or there was another sister, as I recall. Dad was really good at playing the piano. I remember him telling me once that his music teacher gave up on him because he played by ear, and he would sort of go sailing off ahead of her when he was playing something. But he was incredible in that way. He could He could hear a tune, you just hum him a tune or give him an idea of it, and he could play it on the keyboard and add a few tinkly bits here and there and make it a masterpiece. So he had a real talent in that direction. Leanne lived across the road from me, as I said, and her and another girl in the neighbourhood next door to her, we'd all play together. The girl next door was Glenys, and Glenys would nick some money from her grandfather's bedside table and go up the shop and buy cigarettes, and some of us kids would sit under Leanne's house and smoke. It's the only time I've ever smoked. Didn't really like it, except for the times when, as a kid, I would go up to the backyard toilet and roll the toilet paper with the sawdust inside and light it with some matches I'd nicked from the kitchen. And also sometimes you get a bit of dry stick that was hollow, and you could get a few puffs out of that at times too. Other than that, I don't recall too many childhood vices. They may have been there. I just don't remember them. I did kick my older brother in the knee once, and poor thing, he had to go to the doctor and get the wound lanced. I think he'd been teasing me. That's probably what it was at the time. My mother used to say to me often, oh, the stories you used to tell. And when I'd ask her, well, like what? What sort of stories? And she'd say, well, I don't know, but you used to tell a lot of stories. I don't know, yeah. She did say that at one time I was immunised at school, and I came into home and I told her that the needle broke in my arm, so they gave me another one. And so she ended up ringing the school, apparently, and found out that wasn't the case. She would always say to me in later years, oh, you were a funny little thing. Hardest part that I can remember from school being a JW was that there were 3 or 4 girls that I used to hang around with, and each one, when it was their birthday, the others would give them, as the custom was then, a card with a nice little hanky inside. And I couldn't do it. So when it was their birthdays, the others would give them a card and I didn't. And yet when it was mine, they gave me one, and I always felt a bit embarrassed about that. So anyway, I got through primary school and high school, and then I started in the workforce. And the first job I had, again, it was the custom on, if it was your birthday, you bought the whole office cake to share. So I ended up buying more cakes than anybody, because I didn't want them to think that I was a cheapskate, of course. This ended carrying on. I remember when my kids went to school, they would take cupcakes or something on their birthday. So I think we probably overdid it with the cupcakes, again, for the same reason. One job I had, first day I started, part of my job was to be on the mail table in the morning, open all the mail and sort it and take it to the different departments. And we were just standing there, and everyone's chatting, opening envelopes, and this lady says, oh, we had those darn Jehovah's Witnesses around again today. My heart just sank, and I thought, oh no, here we go again. But we had a laugh about it times later and got on pretty well with her in the end. But that was a job that I really did enjoy. I found it really difficult working full-time, plus meetings and field service and all the things you're supposed to do as a JW. And every so often I would find I would come home more often than not on a Tuesday, whether it was because you push to get through the weekend and then nobody likes anyone having Mondays off at work or whatever. But I would come home, say, on a Tuesday night, and I would just walk through the kitchen and say, sorry, Mum, I'm too tired to have any dinner. And I would fall asleep on my bed. I'd wake up about 11 o'clock, have a shower, go back to bed, sleep, get up next morning and off I'd go to work. I'd say, look, I wish I was dead, and I know a lot of kids do it, but I said, I didn't ask to be born. As I said earlier, my parents had my grandparents come and live with us. I think I was about 16 at the time, and as is normal, I think, in those situations with most people, there was friction from time to time, and there'd be a bit of a row, and Pop would say to Dad, well, you give me the money, because he gave us the money towards building the room on the house. You give me my money and I'll go. And, of course, we didn't have any money, so Dad couldn't do it. Pop felt he was pretty safe, and then he was quite surprised one day because my older brother said, I've got the money, I'll give it to you. So that was pretty funny. I think he got quite a shock with that. As I said, there was the friction here and there. You know, we were still kids, really, and there were stupid things like we'd be playing the records or the radio, and Pop would come in and he'd turn the radio down, and he'd walk out the room, we'd turn it up again. You know, stupid, silly stuff. But as I got older, things changed. I don't remember where the feelings started, but I didn't like my grandfather. I went through a lot of guilt about it because I would think, what's wrong with you? This is your grandfather, you know. What sort of person are you to feel so badly about him? But I just couldn't stand him. I had, as they got older and they were attending meetings less, I just had this sneaking suspicion that he went into my room when I was at the meeting, and I didn't like it. So my brothers and I sort of conspired, and my room had a sliding door, so we put some sticky tape partly across the door and partly across the door jamb, and went off to the meeting. And then when we came home and raced in to check it, and there was the sticky tape all mangled in the doorway. So I said, see, I told you, I knew he'd been in here, and I just didn't like it at all. And I talked Dad into putting a lock and key on my bedroom door, and I was quite happy about that then. I was quite chuffed to go off to a meeting and drop it in my purse, and sort of wish I was a bit of a fly on the wall when he tried to come in my room and he couldn't get in. I know that he used to find ways to criticise me all the time. One instance I remember, that he was walking through the dining room one day where we had the piano, and on top of the piano was this little songster book. They used to publish them, these little books with the lyrics of songs in. And I used to buy them because I'd like lyrics for Connie Francis songs and Elvis and Cliff Richard and ones like that. And anyway, he picked up this book one day, and he's thumbing through it and looking down at it, and he starts going on about, oh, disgusting, the things that she buys, you know. And it was, after he moved out of the room, I sort of picked the book up and looked at it, and I thought, what's he talking about? And then I found this song that he'd been looking at. It was called Most People Get Married, and I didn't even know the song. Didn't buy it for that, but turns out it was a Patti Page song, and I love Patti, but I don't recall that song. But the words of it were, I've got them here, so I found it on the net. Some parts of it were, when the kisses get so long that you can't catch your breath, and the hugging gets so strong that it's got you scared to death. Most people get married. That's what they do. Most people get married. And that's what I want to do with you. When you want to walk, let's walk together. Only want to talk, blah, blah, blah. So that's what it was. When you light up like a flame each time your baby calls, and the way he says your name has got you climbing walls. I mean, it's pretty tame compared to today's standards. But there was also another occasion when this lady wandered into the Kingdom Hall off the street. She'd come on the tram, which we had in those days. And one of the brothers went up to her and spoke to her. And then he came over to me with her and asked me, would I look after her during the meeting? Would I sit with her and share my Bible and show her the scriptures as we went along? So I did this. And then at the end of the meeting, she worked in the city, and she was going to catch the train back to the city. But my brother, being the kind person that he was, he had a car by then. He offered to give her a lift into the city. So the three of us went into the city, dropped her off, came home, and then later at home I could hear Pop going on about the company she keeps, and did you see the skirt on that girl? Because as was custom at the time, this girl wore a miniskirt. But yeah, even though I'd been asked by a brother to do this and blah blah, he used it as again, a time to criticise me. The toilet in those days, thankfully, was inside the house. Before that, we used to have to run up the backyard, which was a pain at night time. So we had those terrible chamber pots that used to sit under the bed, which would inevitably get knocked over from time to time, spilling the contents. But anyway, as I said, the toilet was in the house, and many times I would hear my name being taken in vain, because that wall was the wall of their room on the other side. My brother and some of his mates would go to the pub with Pop sometimes, and I remember one time him coming home and one of my brother's mates saying to me, "Oh, your Pop, you know, he doesn't understand. We're sitting at the pub and he said, oh, I don't know what I've done. I don't know what I've done to Joanna." That's my fake name. I'm writing my book, so I'm using fake names. There's a lot more information in the book. I've been actually working on it for the last week or so, and oh boy, it's going to take a long time. But anyway, I remember too, one time we had a circuit overseas visit, and after the meeting was over, I was ducking here and there, dodging him in the Kingdom Hall, till he finally cornered me at one point and said, "Oh, what's happened to your hours?" You know, that was, you know, an elder's daughter. I don't even know it was elders in those days, but my father was a prominent member in the congregation, so yes, my hours weren't up to scratch. As I said before, I felt a lot of guilt about the way I felt about my grandfather, but I didn't know where it came from. And trying to be a good JW, I'd been going through the reasoning book under the title of Settling Personal Differences, and I thought, right, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna confront him and say, "Look, what's your problem with me? Why are you doing this?" And try and find out even too why I felt the way I did about him. But when I spoke to my parents about my intention, they, no, just let it be. Don't do anything about it. I've often regretted that I didn't, but whether it would have made any difference to anything, I don't know. We went to a couple of, a few big conventions, a couple of international ones. One particular in 1963, we went to Melbourne, and I think that was the one. It was in the Sheep Pavilion at the Melbourne Showgrounds or something. And then there was another one in 1969 in Melbourne. That one, I was 20 that year. So I had talked with some friends, and we decided that we'd meet early in the morning this particular day at the convention grounds to go placarding through the streets. We had our big board things front and back, Approaching Kingdom of 1,000 Years, I think it might have been. I can't remember, but we went out and made fools of ourselves doing that. Over the years, there was quite a lot of conventions I attended, naturally, circuit assemblies, district assemblies, and it really wasn't all bad. We had a lot of fun. We used to do food prep and make hamburgers and just, yeah, as I said, we had a lot of fun together, particularly after the assembly was over. In the old days, they used to pack up all the equipment at the end. The circuit assemblies then went from, they were Friday night from 6 till about 9, then all day Saturday and Saturday night up till about 9 again, and then Sunday up till about 6 o'clock. And then as soon as the assembly finished, there was activity everywhere of washing up all the, plates and cups and cafeteria trays and things, and we really, if you got to wash up, it's great when you got a lot of people, and it was a lot of fun. After we'd washed it all up, they would the stuff would all be packed up on these trucks in these wooden crates, and they'd be stored until the next circuit needed them. In April 1970, when I was 20 years old, I was headed to the meeting in my little red Mini, and I parked across the road from the Kingdom Hall, and that's pretty much the last thing I remember. I remember seeing a brother park behind me, and I I did sort of go to say hello to him, but he was busily getting stuff out of the car. So I thought, I'll talk to him when I get into the hall. And I started to walk across the road, and I don't remember anything from that point until later, but apparently there was a car coming down the hill who slowed down to let me walk across the road. And as I started to walk across, the car behind him thought, well, you know, you're too slow, didn't see me, and he pulled out to pass him, and of course he hit me, and I went up in the air and landed on his bonnet and then slid onto the road. I've been told that I actually spoke to people while I was lying on the road, but I don't remember any of that. Then I have little bits of hearing Mum saying, "Oh, look at her head." So I had this lump on my head, and I remember them asking me constantly through the night, you know, what's your name, where do you live? Oh, I can remember the other part too, where I do remember that. I just remember my voice going, I can't have any blood, I can't have any blood. Anyway, the next thing I remembered after, as I said, starting to walk across the road, was waking up in hospital and having some sausage and mashed potato being shoved into my mouth by a nurse or somebody. And then the congregation servant, as I think he was at the time, I saw him coming down the hallway towards my bed, and he brought me the latest copies of the Wake and Watchtower, and I found out, yeah, what had happened to me, that I'd been hit by this car. So I had a broken pelvis and broken tibia and fibula in my leg. It had snapped or whatever. So I was in hospital for 5 weeks to mend the broken pelvis. And my leg was in plaster for 5 months until eventually it healed enough that I could get the plaster off. Problem was, because I was stuck at home with my, leg elevated and my broken leg, I couldn't get away from my grandfather, and that really caused me a lot of anguish, for want of a better word. Because I'd reached the point where if he walked in the room, I would walk out of the room. And I'm not very proud to say that, but that's the way that I felt. So after my leg had healed enough, for a time I moved out of home. I just sort of couldn't handle it, and I went and I shared a house with another couple of girls, witnesses. Until eventually, probably about 6 months, I think the lease was. And then I moved back home. And it was particularly difficult that I had this attitude towards my grandfather, because people viewed him as like the great white father. That's what I used to say. And they would come and visit him at our home, in his room, and talk all sorts of confidential things with him. And when they'd gone, he'd come out in the kitchen and pretty much tell my mum all the things that they'd been telling him. He used to drink a lot. I can remember him stuffing a $20 note or whatever it was at the time into Dad's hand every so often, just saying, you know that what that's for. And that was his free supply of beer, of course. There were times when he was the only person in Brisbane at that time, I believe, who had a licence to marry people. So he pretty much performed the wedding ceremony for any witness that got married at the time. So he went to a lot of weddings and to a lot of receptions, of course, where he'd get drunk quite often. I remember him looking out my bedroom window one day and seeing my brother and his mate helping him out the car, because he couldn't walk a straight line, so they were helping him to get into his room and get into bed. I know he had at least one affair, because strangely enough, in a family that didn't really discuss things, I remember that being discussed at some time over the years. He had an affair with a lady named Lil, so he had at least one. Whether there was ever any action taken at that time or not, I don't know. My older brother went to work on the new building that the Society was doing down in Sydney at Ingleburn. Ingleburn? Yeah. The original Bethel. That was before they ended up moving the whole thing out to the Kingdom Farm. But he was away for quite a few months and worked on that. I went down for a short visit and spent some time chipping rough edges off old bricks so that they could be used in the construction. In my youth, we went through the whole time where there was a lot of fuss over personal grooming, things like moustaches and beards, because it was in the 70s, and you know, all the hippie stuff or whatever. I don't know, the Beatles, whatever. Anyway, so some of the brothers were growing their sideburns and wanted to have moustaches and beards, but that was a no-no. And there were older brothers who'd had them for years, and we'd say, well, how come he can have one and they can't? And, oh, but he's had it for years. And we'd say, yeah, but you had to start somewhere. And there was the miniskirt era as well. Oh, gosh, that was a nightmare. We even had our congregation servant at the time, I remember, get up on the platform one meeting and say that the elders had decided that in this congregation the sisters must wear their skirts to the knee, otherwise they would not be allowed on the platform. It actually got to a stage when you'd go to a circuit assembly and you would just feel that all the brothers were just looking at girls' legs all the time, checking out the length of their skirts and seeing if they complied. I ended up having a different set of clothes. I used to say to Mum, look, I'd stand before Jehovah in what I'm wearing. I wouldn't have any conscience about it at all. The girls I work with wore skirts up to their bums. I mean, they'd lean over the filing cabinet at work to get something out and you could see their knickers. I mean, mine were, compared with them, I'm modest. So anyway, that's what I did. I ended up having a different set of clothing, and worst part was if you got caught out witnessing one weekend and you were there in your daggy long dress and someone you work with drove past and waved or something like that. That was a bit yuck. There was also the issue with the coloured shirts for the brothers. I mean, it was white shirts and nothing else, and everybody else was wearing coloured shirts, so there was a big fuss about that. I know there was at least one congregation somewhere where they kept white shirts on standby. If there was a visiting speaker or whatever came and he had a coloured shirt on, they'd make him change. That's how crazy it was. And then finally one assembly, I think it was down the Gold Coast, I remember going, and Don McLean from Australian Bethel was the speaker, and he came out for the initial talk at the assembly, and he was wearing a yellow shirt, and I really loved it. It was a great talk at the time. The message I got was, you know, the subliminal message was, let's forget all this rubbish and get on with what's important. There was the safari suit time too. The brothers actually were allowed to wear safari suits on the platform, which in our climate was a good thing, because it gets pretty hot up here. And the safari suits had the short sleeves. But if you had a regular suit on, no matter what the temperature, you had to wear your jacket, coat jacket on the platform. That's the way it was. I remember actually, I think it was my dad wrote to the society once because a few people had questioned whether we could do what a lot of the guys in the banks did, and they wore these neat, longish shorts and long socks. And so it was asked whether the brothers here could do the same for field service. Nope. That was the answer. Nope. Anyway, a couple of years after this, my older brother and I decided we'd go to a convention in Adelaide. Never been to Adelaide, and we had family friends down there, and we were going to stay with them, so it wasn't going to be too expensive a trip. So we were going to drive through the night and drive straight through to Adelaide. And yeah, it was going to be a bit of a rush trip. Anyway, we were going to take turns with driving, and my brother started out and he drove to Glen Innes, I think it was. We stopped there for a refreshment or something, and then I was to take over driving from there, which I did. And not long after I got there, I started driving. I got stuck behind this van. It was like dark of night, and all I could see was the back of this van in front of me. And my brother had jumped over the back seat to get some rest, to lie down and get some sleep so he could take over driving after me. Anyway, he said, "I'll pass him," and I said, "Well, I don't know, I can't. I'm a bit nervous, you know. I can't." He said, "Oh, you can tell by the headlights of the oncoming cars if anything's coming." So he sort of sat up and told me when to make my move, and I did it. As I pulled out to pass this truck, I accelerated, but I couldn't seem to get past. Next thing, I think it had been raining a bit, but the tyre caught the bit of loose gravel on the side of the road, and car ended up somersaulting about 5 times and landed in a paddock next to a tree. Thankfully, we didn't hit the tree. I only had a few bruises from the seat belts and stuff. It wasn't too bad, but we ended up spending the night at Guyra Hospital. From what when I looked on the map, I thought, gee, I didn't get far. I didn't drive very far at all. But anyway, next morning I rang Dad, and Mum answered, and I didn't want to worry her, so I asked to speak to Dad, and I said, "Oh, we've had some car trouble." I think, well, maybe that's what I told Mum. Anyway, so Dad came down and picked us up. My brother had hurt his shoulder in the accident, and he was in a bit of pain from that, but I guess we were pretty lucky overall. The next weekend, my 2 brothers went back down to Guyra to check out his car that was in a body shop or whatever somewhere, and it was a write-off, so that was that. We sort of had a few accidents in our family for a few years there. When Mum and Dad were away, and my brothers and I decided we would have a bit of a party, you know. It wasn't a wild party or anything like that. We just had some families from the congregation and some friends, and we were having a good time. And then at one part of the evening, my younger brother decided he'd like to take a spin on a friend's motorcycle. So he did that, but about 2 blocks away from our house, he came off the bike and he ended up in hospital, and that was the end of the party. I did a dumb thing at the time. I don't know, trying to be this conscientious person and do the right thing. I typed up this statement for my brother to say that it was his fault and that he'd be responsible for the repairs to the motorbike and all this. And so poor old Dad, after he came back from holidays, he was the one that ended up having to pay for it, which wasn't really right. I mean, the guy gave him permission, so he probably should have at least contributed something. Then one Sunday in 1973, I don't like talking about this, one of my younger brother's mates popped into our house. Boys all loved cars and working on cars at that stage, and this guy had a bit of problem. He had a noise in the motor of his car, and he didn't seem to be able to find where it was coming from. So my 2 brothers went outside, and while the mate was driving the car, one of them got on each side, sitting on each side of the bonnet, and sort of tried to hear where it was coming from. They couldn't hear it, so they suggested start the car up and just move it very slowly around the corner. We lived on a corner, and so they did that, but unbeknownst to them, another car had come around the corner and had parked a little way up ahead of them. So even though they were going slowly and they inched around the corner, they were so intent on looking in the bonnet, and of course the guy driving couldn't see because the bonnet was up. He was just blind driving, and they bumped into this other parked car, and my older brother's leg got caught between the 2 bumper bars. So it was instant mayhem, and we went inside, and they came running inside. We didn't know about it, and we rang the ambulance, and we thought, he's broken his leg and they'll put a plaster on it and then he'll come home. So I said to Mum, well, you wait here. It was the meeting that afternoon, and I said, you wait here and I'll just follow the ambulance up to the hospital, and that was that. Anyway, when I got up there, and we were waiting in the emergency room, and he was in terrible pain. I'm going to call him Fred, because that's what I call him in my book. My older brother's Fred and my younger brother's Lionel. And Fred was in this terrible pain, and I just couldn't stand it. And I went over to the nurse and I said, look, can you give him something for the pain? And she said, oh, I can't give him anything until the doctor's seen him. And oh, gee, it was terrible. Anyway, the doctor finally came, and I think they put a dye in and did some x-rays or whatever, and next minute all hell broke loose, and the doctor's saying, look, he's really smashed the whole leg. He was hoping he might be able to put a Dacron artery to replace the artery, but he wasn't sure, and he said, if I don't operate now, he'll lose his leg, he could lose his life, and all this drama. So poor mum waiting at home, expecting him to come home with a plaster on his leg. I had to race home and tell her that it was more serious than we thought. By this time the meeting had started, so I got mum in the car and we went down to the Kingdom Hall and interrupted the meeting and walked through in my daggy clothes and tapped on the shoulder of one of the brothers that were there, and they came out and I told them what was going on, and he got another brother and they came up to the hospital, and there was all the blood issue going on backwards and forwards, and the doctor ended up, as he walked off to go to surgery, saying, well, if I think he needs blood, I'll give it to him. Anyway, we waited and waited, and we finally got the news down that they had saved the leg, and we were all very relieved. And the doctor came back, and he said, but I did give him plasma. And I guess we thought, oh, well, at least it wasn't whole blood. Anyway, so he's recovered gradually, fairly well. We got and visited him, and I used to read the chart that was on the end of his bed, and I'd be reading and it'd say, you know, foot warm, pulse, and then next day it'd be foot cool, slight pulse, next one, you know, foot cold, no pulse, or I don't know. Anyway, it was probably within about a week, and then we got a phone call in the middle of the night saying gangrene had set in and that the leg would have to be removed. So we were all pretty upset, but I guess happens. And at least he had his life, and that was the main thing. He got engaged the week before to a lady who had 3 children already, but yeah, anyway, they ended up getting married.